Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Beautifully Broken podcast. We are here with Dr. Ryan Meyers. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Freddie. It's so awesome to be here. We talk all the time, and so I'm excited to sit down and kind of make this a good formal discussion, but just talk about, what we do and love sharing with people. So this will be great.
Yeah, I get to talk to a lot of people that are working on the next gen, liquid blood biopsy tests and people that are working on genomic sequencing. But Ryan, you run a clinic in Utah. Can you tell us a little bit about your practice?
Yeah, definitely. So I own and run what's called the Movement Clinic here in Utah, and we specialize in accelerated healing and recovery. And so the short kind of story of our clinic is we started primarily in the sports injury pain and rehab world, and still specialize in that and everything from youth athletes to professional athletes. But that works. And really, it's us, right? It's middle-aged, healthy, active individuals trying to live active lives, but dealing with either acute and or chronic pain. So we have a huge specialty in solving chronic pain. Through this whole journey, my wife went through a 16-year chronic illness journey. And we realized that a lot of the things we were using to help on that side, the pain and injury side, help accelerate her process through that. And once we started getting some good answers. And so really for the past number of years, I've kind of shifted and recommitted my life to functional medicine and helping to solve what we call silent illnesses. So these chronic illnesses that, don't have, or at least on the surface, this is all stuff we hear about, right? Your labs are normal. We can't find anything. Everything looks good. Yet you're, living at home in misery, or you can't get out of bed. I say this is you dress up and put on a good face to take your kids to school, go to the store, go to church, but really you're suffering silently inside. And haven't been able to find any answers. And so from living through that, which I actually think is a unique experience as a clinician, and having that experience first as patients and caretakers, to building solutions around that in our clinic. And on that side, I work with patients both locally and virtually across the country to help discover root cause illness and work to build personalized treatment care plans for them to get to resolution. And to really, my why is to enable people to live the life that matters most for them without interruptions from either illness or pain. So
Yeah,
that's what we do here.
it deeply resonates. It deeply resonates. I can think about, for as far as I've come, as much has unfolded to allow me to just express very energetically. And I just worked an event this weekend at Health Optimization where I was on my feet for 13 hours, back-to-back days.
Yeah.
And man, I understand sometimes it is about you putting on a good face, whether that's to go out and go pick up the groceries and you're like, man, do I feel like I was whacked by a sack of potatoes last night? It's really wild. Ryan, can I ask how your wife is doing today?
She's doing phenomenal. And so, we lived in a world where she would sometimes sleep for 4 or 5 days straight. Mental health issues, musculoskeletal pain issues, fatigue is an understatement, brain fog, neurological issues to now. I mean, she does CrossFit or some form of working out every day. She's worked in and out of our clinic with patients over the years. She's a mom, right? So she's running, we have everything from 16 years old down to 4 years old, and she is a rock star with them. And so, yeah, she very personally, experiences her story with our patients also, and feels like, we went through that as a gift so that we can share that with other people. Yeah, I mean, she's doing phenomenal.
Was there some type of a keystone turning point, or do you think is it just layers over time that added up into one day you're like, oh my goodness, we're doing really good? Because I know sometimes when you're in it, you're waiting for that one thing. You're waiting for that 20 sessions of hyperbaric, or you're waiting
Right.
for that NAD infusion to be the turning point. What was her experience?
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. I was actually thinking about this a little bit over the weekend as I was thinking about a few patients that I'm working with, and just some different things, discussion topics that I'm having, and I and really kind of the thought process I came to, and this will come around and answer your question, but I think people that are looking for healing typically have three unmet expectations. And first would be who. So, who has the answers or who knows how to figure it out? The how or the what it's going to take. And then time, right? How long? And I think everybody wants the first person that they go to have the answers, and the how or the what to be something super easy and magical, and they want it to happen yesterday, right? And even when I'm dealing with pain, an injury, it's like, look, the longer you've dealt with this, the longer the recovery is going to be. And with stuff like chronic illnesses, where now we're dealing with potentially every system in the body that has dysregulation and all those types of things, the answer of what's going on is probably more unconventional than you want it to be. And the how is, I often tell patients, and I'll paraphrase the quote, but it's from Remember the Titans, where they chastise him for how small his playbook is for the offense, and he says, like, 6 plays, just like Novocaine, give it time, it works every time, something like that. People want the magical, flashy, new, glamorous, when often it's the right things applied in the right way consistently over time. And then as far as timing goes, I tell people, like, look, like, everybody reacts and responds differently. And that's why as a clinician, we have to be able to know how to adapt and shift and pivot based on how a patient's responding to care. And so, there's a lot of cookie cutter stuff out there. So now flip back to answer your question with my wife, the things that, especially looking backwards, but even in the moment, because in the moment, yeah, you're like, man, we've been at this for years. We've spent thousands of dollars. We've done tons of things. And in the moment, it's hard to notice progress sometimes. The other analogy I tell people, it's like when you're trying to lose weight and you're working out and you see yourself in the mirror every day and you think nothing's changing. And then you see someone you haven't seen in a few months and they're like, holy cow, you look amazing. Very similar with healing. When you're living in your own skin every day, sometimes it's hard to see those 1, 2, 3, 5% changes, which are significant. But when someone on the outside is not living in your skin, sometimes we see that more often. And so in the moment, yeah, sometimes we were like, man, like, what? Are we ever going to get out of this? Is it ever getting better? And the journey's not linear. So we'd see bumps and then she'd dip again. And we'd see bumps and then she'd dip. What was interesting is we looked backwards, the consistency. So my wife is like, if I'm doing something, I'm doing it all in type of a person. And so what that meant for us was, and for her, is if her clinicians told her to do something, she did it 100%. She would do the 100%. She would do the treatments 100%. She would not miss a day. She would detox 100%. She did everything. And I think what was interesting at the time, she was kind of going through this journey with another, kind of with like a group of people that were going through similar journeys. And we started to notice that she was accelerating and improving at a different rate than others. And when you start to dig in and look, just compare 1-to-1, consistency was the most dramatic thing that changed. And she will tell you consistency on diet and consistency on detoxing. Even when everybody might have been getting similar treatments, her consistency and dedication to those was dramatic. And then I think the other thing which kind of spurned off, for us to see, wait, there's something else going on here. So I had been introduced to hyperbarics really early in my clinical profession. And we've always had that in our clinic, and we're using that really heavily to help accelerate healing and recovery with our pain and injury. And when she was going through her chronic illness journey, she was using hyperbarics very consistently. And that's where we started to say, okay, she's consistent with these things, but also there's a few other things that she's doing that we started to notice her progress was changing and was moving at a different rate. She'd have those dips, but they were shorter and what I would say less deep each time a dip would come. So that's where we started saying, okay, there's stuff happening here that's different.
Yeah.
So now how can we leverage the knowledge that I have and that we were using the success, look at the research of what's happening, and then really understand different ways to look at how to uncover root cause illness or root cause issues that are driving illness, and then put together a new system or infrastructure of patient care that it really doesn't exist out there in the same way. And I shared with a friend yesterday, it's a line from the live action Cinderella, where bear with me, early on, she meets the prince in the forest, doesn't know that it's him, and he's on a hunting trip, and she asks him not to kill the animal. And he says, well, we're hunting, it's what's done. And then she says, just because it's what's been done doesn't mean it's what should be done. And that's always stayed with me, especially in a patient care approach, is too many patients are seeing practitioners that just do what's been done, and conventional and traditional means produce conventional and traditional outcomes. And so what I believe and what we discovered with her and now apply with all of our patients is to get lasting outcomes and results that are different than what's happening other places, you have to have unconventional solutions to problems and be able to look at things unconventionally. And so that's really what we learned and did through her journey, and now have created and try to multiply with the patients that we see on a daily basis.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, I really like the piece of when I'm listening to you walk through your wife's story, like I'm aware of how strong the negativity bias is within the mind, and that is
Yeah.
a hardwired primitive instinct to keep us alive. And at the same time, the mind is saying, we're not better, we're not better, we're not better, as
Yep.
opposed to like what had been done in that group situation in which your wife started to pull away from the pack. They were actually acting as a mirror. And so it gave you like, wait, this is a benchmark. You're pulling away. And so I think it's so great. It's like whatever you can use to identify, like, what did I go down for 2 weeks? Did I go down for 3 days? Because the minute I will tell you, let's just say I a lot of the times my down was a small bowel obstruction. It's
Hmm.
really bad pain, right? 3-4 days of vomiting. If I get that pain today, I go through the same scenario. I'm like driving to the emergency room. I'm picking what hospital I'm going to go to. I think about how long, like I'm imagining like I wonder what I would use to recover from the surgery. My
Right.
brain
Right.
is mapping out the worst, even though the pain today, it's like a 2 out of 10, where it used to be a 10 out of 10 for years and years and years. And I have the tools, right? Castor oil packs and pulsed electromagnetic field and all the things that I do to put the body back into parasympathetic and remind itself that it's safe. But it's the same story that I still wrestle with. And I can remember how strong it was. It could be, the episode could have been 3 days, but the 2 weeks after, I was very depressed, didn't really feel safe,
Yeah.
that because and a lot of this time I was doing it on my own. So I didn't have that support system necessarily to be like, oh, it'll be okay. My story was nobody knows what this is like. I'm the only one going through this. Nobody is as sick as I am. And I think with these chronic illnesses, can be so dark at times that you get lost in that story.
Yep. And I'll add on to that chronic illness, and I'll say chronic pain, right? It's something
Mm,
that you live with some sort of invisibility with, and it's hard to describe, and it's hard to, and you're right, your mind, and that's what's so interesting. We're hardwired from a survival standpoint to say all those things subconsciously so that our body goes into protection mode. But the reality is that's not a healing place. And
mm,
so, and that was another thing that my wife was really big on and still is, she quickly realized that if she got on, or paid attention to, all these message groups, Facebook, social media, it's all just negativity. And, and she made a conscious choice to stay out of it. And so, look, we talk with our patients big too about journaling for a lot of reasons. One, gratitude is powerful, and a lot of them don't believe that until they do it. But then two, being able to look backwards and say, oh, wow, like 2 months ago when this happened, I felt like this. And today I feel like this, and it's still not great, but holy cow, it's, 2 months ago, I couldn't even get out of bed. Today I was able to get out of bed, take the kids to school, go to work, do whatever. And I was tired at the end of the day, but I had energy to do that, right? Because people will come to me and be like, well, I still have fatigue or I still have pain. And it's like, well, yeah, you still have pain, but you worked in the yard for 6 hours yesterday, where a month ago you couldn't even get out of bed. Or you
mhm.
still have brain fog or chronic fatigue, but you were able to make it through a full work day and then had to crash at night. So The milestones, I think, are very powerful if we have a way to identify them and recall those back. And that's more powerful than everybody else's negative milestones or milestones of why things are so bad and why there aren't answers. And that'll trigger me into, I just had this thought come in. There's a law, and there's actually a lot written about this, that your subconscious has to answer every question that you ask it. And so, there's books written called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life, right? But the concept that I love is, and the example I give to everybody is, how often do you see somebody and you can't remember their name and you're like, what's their name? I can't think of their name. What's their name? What's their name? And then 2 days later, you remember their name. It's because
Hmm.
as soon as you asked your subconscious what's their name, it goes to work figuring out its name. And
Mm.
so the science behind this is, if you say, man, why am I so sick? Why does nothing work? Why is this so hard? Why is this so bad? Your subconscious then starts to fill your conscious brain with answers that answer those questions. Here's why it's so hard. Here's why you're so sick. Here's why you're never going to get better. Here's why. Here's why. And so it's a skill to be able to reshape those questions to say, why is it so easy for me to get better? And that sounds so stupid to people that don't feel better. They're like, I'm not saying that. Or how is this treatment going, so amazing for me? Or why am I enough? How am I enough when partnered with this? How, it's shifting those to positive, because then your brain goes, oh yeah, it is easy to get better. And here's all the things of reasons why. And it answers those in your brain. And so there's a lot out there about like writing, reciting, listening to like affirmations or sound, whatever you want to call those things.
Hmm.
I'm a big proponent of writing down and reciting questions every morning also, that have to do with this. So, why am I enough here? Why is it so easy for me to get better when I do these treatments? Why is it so easy for me to do this? And really take time to write those down. And people sometimes say it feels like vinegar in my mouth when I say these things because they're
Mm.
not real. And it's like, good. Then if they don't taste that bad in your mouth, then they're not strong enough questions in the opposite direction. And you start to rewire your brain. And after a few days and weeks of doing this, your brain starts answering those questions of, yeah, here's 100 reasons why you are enough. Here's 100 reasons why you do feel better here. And it changes your physiology. So this
That's
isn't
right.
just about dealing with relationships and people. It's about how you can change the physiology by rewiring this from a negative place to making it answer questions about why your health is enough, why you are doing better, why things are sufficient for your needs, all those types of things.
Yeah. Yeah. From seeing people in my journey have access to all the tools from the best clinics and the best hyperbaric chambers and stem cell procedures, and then watching some people do really well and other people do really poorly, and then being able to identify my bias is that this one not I don't like non-negotiable for its rigidity. I do like essential, that this essential piece in which we honor the design of the subconscious and conscious mind, and the ratios in which the conscious mind is such a small little processing portion of the pie, or the subconscious is so big, that my bias is that it is an essential piece to healing. And it
Yeah.
doesn't negate all the things that we need to honor, like genetics and methylation pathways. And it's an essential piece. And that's just been my experience.
Well, and I think, and here's where I love talking about this type of stuff. But then the other answer is, well, how does this come down to be really tactical and like actual day to day? Because, yeah, you talk to somebody who's been struggling with stuff for a long time and they're like, yeah, cool, I can do all that. I'm like, okay, then start with showing up every day. Start, whether that means you might have to extend your trust for a certain amount of time to say, okay, I'm just going to show up to my appointments every day,
Hmm.
or I'm going to take this supplement every day, even if I don't totally believe, understand, or whatever. Because yeah, so you can ask somebody to write a journal, you can ask somebody to work on their subconscious mind, you can ask them to do all that. And a lot of times people are not in a place where it's like, yeah, I get that, but what are the answers? Like, okay, so trust me on that. In the meantime, the soundtrack has to be, I'm just going to show up. I'm just going to
Hmm.
show up. And I try to teach that a lot. It's like, look, the consistency is what matters. Again, I'm a
Yeah.
visual analogy person. It's like, look, you don't go to a gym one day and walk away with a six pack unless you're Freddie. Um,
Yes.
and it's the same here. It's like, look, if you've been sick for a decade, you're not going to do a couple of therapies a week and take a supplement and be better.
Yeah.
We are literally rewiring and changing your immune system, your physiology in a number of different ways, and it takes time. And
Hmm.
so the original soundtracker question might be, why is it so easy to show up? Why is it so easy to take this supplement every day? And that's the type of thing, even with like eating, people are like, I have to eat this way. I'm like, no, you get to eat this way. You get to choose to do that. And when that shifts, it's so much more empowering.
Hmm.
So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's profound. With that, Ryan, I'm sure in a room of 100 people with chronic pain, all very much experiencing pain, I would offer to the audience or anybody hearing this, we can imagine every single person has a different blueprint that's driving their symptomology. One might have been an auto accident, or another person, again, might have been like a severe like termination of their job and the relationship at the same time. And these syndromes develop. So because you're a clinic that deals with chronic pain, how do you address that? When you're working with this very diverse population, which is coming to you for essentially the same thing. I say this in this way because you start to realize like the lunacy of saying, well, this is the medicine for pain,
Yeah.
right?
So I come at it from a few places. I think one being able to assign, like, there has to be some objectivity. So helping people understand really how and what's driving what's going on, to as much as their understanding is able to comprehend that. From a pain standpoint, explaining some of the different pain pathways, or here's what's going on biochemically, and here's how what might have initially been a tissue injury is now just a neurological pain loop. And because of that, and sometimes you have to prove that to them. And so with pain, for instance, I might have to prove to them that there is no tissue damage anymore, which means,
Hmm.
all of the pain related things that address tissue damage are not, that's why they're not helping, because we've got to address some of these other things. And here are the tools that we need to do that. And same on the chronic illness side. For instance, so often people are going through treatment to kill and fight infection, kill and fight infection, kill and fight infection, with whatever name, I'm not going to say them, but whatever name tag of infection you want to call that.
Mm-hmm.
9 times out of 10, by the time they get to me or they've been working on this, the infection is long gone. The tissue damage is long gone. And we're dealing with a physiological aftermath of that. And if you can put some objectivity towards that, one, that helps. And then I think there's this, again, going back to the mental and subconscious, like I say, people come in with name tags on, a name tag of chronic pain, a name tag of neuropathy, a name tag of long COVID, a name tag of Lyme, a name tag of MS, a name tag of whatever. Like, some people come in with 20 name tags on that they've been assigned or given. And we got to take the name tags off,
Mm.
because the identifying with your pain, the identifying with a name tag of a diagnosis, that doesn't help get us to where we need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to pain, because we're talking about that, the longer, look, I went back to school when I was 30 to get into healthcare. And a lot of that is because I had an injury that I had been dealing with some chronic pain with for years,
Mm-hmm.
and wanted to figure out, I'm like, there has to be better answers. And so, but even with that, the longer people are like, I just have chronic pain, or my L5 is just bad, right? Now you're assigning something that doesn't necessarily deserve to be assigned. And so for
Mm.
me, there has to be some objectivity to help people understand the why of what's going on. And again, explained most of the time in a way people are like, no one's ever told me that before. I worked with a patient that had, on imaging, really bad, quote unquote, arthritis or degeneration, and was told, your only option is a joint replacement. And fairly young individual. And I'm like, after doing assessing, I'm like, hold on, there's actually lots of options. And we went through them and started doing some work. And as this patient's getting better, it's like, how come nobody told me? And I'm like, well, that's a whole nother conversation. But the reality is, if we're able to give some objectivity as to what and why it's going on, then the how can really drive. And then you can always anchor back to, well, you remember, this is what's going on, and this is how we're going to get that better. And then tracking that objectivity over time. But then also, I think too, you mentioned it, and look, you and I know this. We go to these conferences and talk to all these people. Like, there are 1,000 tools out there. It doesn't mean you need 1,000 tools to get better. You
Yeah.
need a collection of a few of the right tools stacked in the right way. And, when I speak and teach, the analogy that I always use is, it doesn't matter how cool the hammer somebody has to use. What matters is the mansion that they can build with the hammers that they have. And so at the end of the day, patients don't care what wattage, lumen, pressure, gigawattage, and you and I know this. You go to these things, and it's like, and that's why I tell people, I'm like, if a clinician is advertising a hammer, they don't know how to use it. If a machine, and that's where, as I teach and present, it's like, okay, yeah, here's what this thing does. But what matters is it in the hands of a clinician who actually knows how to use the hammer, that tool belt, to build a mansion of health for you? Because
Yeah.
and at some point, actually having there can be superfluous options, and that's a lot. Like, so I would say now, kind of this like functional medicine or alternative medicine, whatever, complement, like whatever this world is. I kind of don't like most of those terms, but it's turning into kind of what I would say we say conventional medicine struggles with, is instead of getting a prescription or a surgery for an issue or for a symptom or a lab value, what's happening now is we're throwing a therapy or a supplement at a lab value instead of truly understanding, you have a symptom, you have a lab value, that means this system has an issue. I mean, we'll talk about, like, with you, and with Flowpresso, right? This is huge for me. It's everything should tell a story, and it says, okay, look, I know these lab values mean this, I know these mean this, but what really all that means going on is we've got stagnated lymph due to this issue, and it's driving a pain syndrome, or it's driving your immune system to produce abnormal amounts of inflammation or dysregulated amounts of inflammation, because we have a system over here that's broken. So yes, I can see that maybe your lipid panel's off, your hormones might be off, some of your inflammatory markers might be off, but it has nothing to do with any of those. It has to do with the system over here that's broken. We use Flowpresso in our clinic because that's like, man, if I can't get the garbage collector to go through and get rid of everything and then teach it to do its job on its own, and the garbage collector being the lymph system, I can put a lot of really cool stuff in the body, but it's not going to do what I need it to do because the other systems aren't working the way it's supposed to. So this approach for pain, for illness, has to be truly understanding the mechanisms, teaching that, and then building what I call a program protocol or an experience for the patient that actually drives an outcome, not just therapy shopping, supplement shopping. And, it's like, oh, someone said I need to heal my gut, so they gave me this. I'm like, well, cool, but like, that's not what you need, because that's not why you have a problem with your gut. And so anyway, that's how we got there, but that's,
well, it's I think where we're like landing here right now is like, you need to do both the education and empowerment piece, but you also need to deliver an experience in a clinical practice that arrives at an outcome. As a clinician, or when I was like running like Institute for Functional Health Coaching, when I was running a full practice, I had a timeline in which I had to deliver a new state of being, or that person is not hanging around very long. So this is, and at that time I really wasn't working with any tools. This is all lifestyle stuff. I'm not a doctor. So what my mentor, Dr. Dixon Tom in Scottsdale, Arizona, people will go there to the clinic for a week and they're immersed in hyperbaric and vibrational sound bed and Flowpresso and NanoV and IV vitamin infusions and transcranial magnetic stim. And they have a thing where the body's like, I feel good. And I think there's two things to take from that. It's like, yes, you had support, right? You had support from tech that complemented pathways in the body that existed. And you just got evidentiary proof that you can do it. Like, you can feel this way. Now, the reality is, unless you had a never-ending funds, which I don't think you want that to be your life, plugged in all these things all the time, but it's not realistic. So how do you take that lesson that you got in the clinical practice, and how do you again work with the other pieces, like we're saying, like, well, that now is there an internal story or a question? Could be like, hey, look what you just did, body. Is this valid? It's like, can you celebrate this experience? Are you interested in feeling like this more? So I think, to your point, like, how you're stacking therapies in a clinic is very important, and not having like, here's our 100 devices and 100 supplements. It's like, intentionally understanding, what does your little, like, what does your roadmap look like here over the next few months, so we can show you like a little bit
Yep.
of improvement in your terrain.
Yep. Totally. Totally. And the one phrase that's like is coming to my mind over and over in this discussion. That's another mindset piece, but I think it's also another reality piece that we teach daily, is what we call the upside to pain or the upside to illness, especially when dealing with chronic. And what I mean by that is, and most people don't realize this until they're on the other side, but we'll use pain for the example, right? I mean, if you've had chronic pain in your back for years, eventually there becomes an upside where, I mean, quite literally, you're potentially not able to do a lot of stuff. You're not able to lift a ton of things, maybe do some types of jobs. So over time, certain things are less expected of you. Same with like a chronic illness, and you can't get out of bed, you have fatigue, and it's real, right? And so there's less expected. You have something that you identify with to talk about that gives attention, that gives some validity to what you are and who you are. And we see this all the time, that at some point through a healing journey of pain or chronic illness, as your function starts to improve, there's almost like this roadblock that's like, hold on a second. As I get better, as I don't have these symptoms and I'm able to do more is expected of me. There's less sympathy. I have to get up and go to work, or I have to do these types of things, or I have to cook meals and take care of the kids. And the warning that we give is, that's what you want. That's what you came in here for. But that survival mechanism in your brain says, well, wait a second. And look, I see this in our gym all the time. That person that always talks about their bad shoulder, they have something to talk about to everybody and identify with and get attention from. And it's like, and I'm like, why don't you come in and get treatment? Like, oh yeah, I got to do something about it. But they never do, because the moment it goes away, they lose a status, right? And it's the same with illness. And so we teach this upside of pain or this upside of illness, because the upside is there is some form of attention and validity and less expectation. And so I remind people all the time, look, you actually want expectation. You don't want to be popular because you're sick. You don't want to be this. You want to have the challenge of getting up and going to work and being paid, and like getting back into society. And so that's a big piece too, that I think is, as you're doing all this, and that's why we get really clear on what are your goals and what's your vision, and we're going to help you get there. So this is why I call it a patient experience, because it's more than just, here's these supplements, do these IVs, do this, and you're going to get better. It's like, the experience is, we're on a racetrack now to get you to a finish line. And we're going to, it's a multifaceted approach that gets you there.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. How verse, I mean, this is not the average, this is not the average conversation clinics have with patients that are seeking. It's very unheard. I mean, it's great. I'm sure people are listening to this and be like, wow, my doctor's never even asked me if I sleep or what I eat or how I feel.
Yeah.
It's not normal. How many people work in the clinic? I'm just interested.
So currently we have about 10 employees. That's a mix of part-time, full-time, health coaches, some remote. And so, everybody kind of fills a role in that. But we also talk about that, from the beginning to end. Everybody has a role in everybody's healing journey, from when you answer the phone to when you greet them at the door, to when you check them out and deal with their finances, to putting the IV in there. Like, every experience can be a healing experience. And even if you're just, the therapy tech that's putting them in or out of the HBOT, your interaction with them is a healing experience.
Yeah, profound. Yeah, it's beautiful to hear there's a level of awareness happening at clinics, because it's not the norm. How do you deal with or who deals with this financial piece. A lot of the stuff we've mentioned on this podcast is not covered under typical insurance models. There are often times when, after you've been in this loop of chronic illness long enough, you find yourself, it's very common to have people go through bankruptcy and be maxed out on their credit cards. So how do you have that conversation with people when they need it? They need to walk through a different door, and the financial piece is a challenging point of contention.
Yeah. So I had a patient tell me once they met with a quote, functional medicine practitioner. And I thought this was fascinating that he said this to a patient, but he said, look, I could literally bankrupt every patient if I wanted to. I'm like, well, first of all, that's interesting because I never thought about that, but you're right. And so who handles that? I mean, our team does. We have people that have those financial discussions with people. Again, I think this is one of the biggest challenges. I think if I could treat people for free and be able to support my family and keep our lights on our business, I'd find a way to do it. But
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, therapies cost money to deliver and staff. And so, I'll tell you, at least in our area, most of the therapies that we offer were significantly less expensive, but it still costs money. So where we might offer an IV that we might charge $150 for down the road, somebody might be charging $300 or $400 for that.
Yeah.
And so, it's balancing business and healthcare is an interesting thing because it's like, look, I got to be able to keep the lights on and deliver the care that we have, and things cost money. And I think, again, having lived through this as a patient, we can tell that story too of like, look, I was there. I know it was like every couple of months having to come up with several $1,000s for, well, we did this, we got to shift, we got to move, we got to do. So, we've explored some different things over the years, and honestly, consistently try to explore new and different ways to try to ease that burden and make it more sustainable. I'm also very upfront with people of like, look, like, I don't know what you've been told, but this is probably a multi-year process, but that doesn't mean you're doing everything every day for multi-years. And so it's kind of trying to draw
Mm-hmm.
this line of beginning to end and set some type of expectations. But yeah, from a monetary standpoint, like we probably undercharge on a lot of things and could do more, which again is a delicate balance of, being a business owner and being profitable, which is a big deal. But I also believe that you could have the coolest things in your building, but if nobody can take advantage of them, it doesn't matter. It's how do you find a balance? And it's a fine balance and all, even transparency. I feel like we are constantly looking at that and trying to figure that out. And shifting and adapting even some of our pricing models and how we go about that with people, because I want people to get better. I want people to have access to care that matters. I have a family and I've got
Yeah.
employees that have families, and I don't think most patients are aware of that. But then again, you have to deal with the heartburn of where they've been through already,
That's right.
and be sympathetic to that. And what I find sometimes, some people are like, hey, here's the first phase of the plan and it looks like this, let's dive in. Some might say, I can do this right now. So it's like, cool, let's do that, but let's do that 100%. And sometimes what I find is if you can, clinically, if you can show both biochemically and symptomatically that you can move the needle for somebody,
Mm-hmm.
that's where they're like, okay, I can figure out how to do more. Or I'm a big proponent of like, look, if we as a clinic can together with you get you to the point where, yeah, you're not there, but hey, you can make it back to work a little bit more, or you can support your home, or your spouse can get back to work more because they aren't having to take time out of work to take care of you because your symptoms are improving. If that's where you can make actually an amazing shift for a household where
Mm-hmm.
their ability to generate income changes. And so one, that changes their family's life, but two, it actually makes their access to care different.
Yeah.
I deal a lot with like biotoxin illness and mold illness, and there's a lot of practitioners who will not take a patient on until they are out of proven exposure, meaning they're out of their home that might have been a mold home. And I'm like, that's not feasible for like 90% of people. But here they are dealing with brain atrophy and multi-system symptoms. And so it's like, look, if we can get you 5, 10, 15, 20% better, it gives you the capacity to handle this exposure issue, to handle the where you need to get to issue, to live life a little bit more. So, I mean, to be honest, I think the pricing conversation about all of this is a complex one. But I'll even say sometimes the patients who have all the money, they don't want, they're like less apt to spend it than I would say maybe somebody who's financially struggling. It's, taken a large enough toll on their life that they're willing to do what it takes to get better. That's kind of this interesting progress of understanding that middle ground. So that's why, we don't, I would say, we have a lot of the tools, I don't focus on like a lot of kind of what I would call like the elite biohacking community of like, hey, come pay 30 grand and you get, 800 lab markers and blah, blah, and we're going to give you a plant, like, because I also find a lot of the times those people don't end up doing anything. So it's like, cool, we made money on your analysis, but you're like, that's too much hard work. I got 18 meetings and I'll have my assistant contact you to schedule. And it's like the stakes for them aren't high enough to get better.
Mm.
And the life change that they'd feel is here, where someone who hasn't been able to get out of bed for the last 10 years, the life change is here, right? We're off the screen. It's significant.
Yeah.
But I think as a practitioner, it's also my duty to wrestle with this financial issue and be transparent with patients. I mean, like I probably could be making a lot more money than I am, but even, but charging a fraction of probably what we could charge. But people have access, and access is something that's really important to me.
Yeah, I'd join with you in that. I often find it's for me it was, and this is more of a rear view mirror discovery. It's like looking back and understanding. I was like, oh wow, what I was doing there, I was reallocating funds. Whether it was renting a room in my 2-bedroom apartment on Airbnb, or for a while I dropped health insurance and did a health share. Because the health insurance was really just, that's if I go into the hospital again. That's if I
Yeah.
need antibiotics, and even the health share is some of the different ones are covering that. So a lot of times that financial, we can just go back and like, well, what are we spending money on monthly, or it's going through, your cabinet. And I was like, well, what are you spending money on now as far as
Yeah.
supplements? And let's have a deeper conversation on if you need any of those and you understand if they're doing anything for you. So that's always been a fun exercise for me to do it with family and friends. And I'm like, I
Mm,
bet you the money for this 20 sessions of hyperbaric might already be in the budget. It might not be now, but we might be able to get there in 4 months if we just move some stuff around.
totally. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. If we think about I wanted to, because you work with so much chronic pain and chronic issues, where do like the regenerative therapies of stem cells and exosomes fall into your practice? Is that something you work with?
Yeah, so I would say this that's a newer addition to our practice, and that's a world that I've kept my eye on for a really long time because I'm probably in the camp that I believe there's a future there, but we might not have the best clarity compared to some other things. However, so the short answer is yes, we use some regenerative tissue products in our clinic, both injectables and systemic, so IV type therapies that we offer. But I will tell you, I'm very clear on all of the above that it is a piece of the puzzle. For instance, I say we're not just an inject and see you later clinic. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of those. They might charge $10,000 for an injection in your knee, and they inject you and say, "Hey, we'll follow up with you in 6 months and see how you feel." It's kind of goes back to a similar conversation that I've had with a surgeon that I work with all the time, and is basically like, "Look, I can fix the injury, but I can't fix the cause." And I
Mm-hmm.
think regenerative products are very similar. They can help rebuild and restructure or induce those processes, but that joint tissue, for instance, didn't get there because of a lack of stem cells, right? It didn't get there because of a lack of a exosome. It got there, so we're talking about joints, for instance, like it got there because there was some sort of stimulus that happened that caused layers and layers of neuromuscular compensation and muscle imbalances that have made it so that you walk this way now. And in the early stages, you didn't even notice it. So you kept playing tennis or kept playing basketball or kept running or crossfitting or whatever for years and years. And you're like, yeah, like my knee kind of feels this way. But, and you might even, massage gun, you might even gotten some treatment, done a little bit of rehab, but maybe the underlying actual neuromuscular imbalances weren't handled appropriately. And to really shift the gait that you're having, I say our bodies are master compensators. So now here you are 10, 20 years later, and we took an MRI of your knee, and you have cartilage thinning, so you have to get a knee replacement. Well, or we can inject stem cells in there and it's going to regrow everything. Well, first of all, it's not going to regrow everything. And there's no study yet that actually shows that there's a magical injection. But what we do know is these products are phenomenal with bringing in healing mechanisms and helping to stimulate your body's natural ability to produce these processes. So really, they're kind of like an accelerant in my mind. But again, same with like, look, I had my knee scoped a few years ago with some stuff that happened, but unless I actually do the work rehab wise and rehab's a weird term, but really movement medicine and neuromuscular retraining and reconditioning and really starting to shift how your muscles are firing and what those imbalances look like, measure, map, activate, shift, change, and then strengthen on top of those. I mean, look, people can be pain-free and extremely highly active on a joint that has thinning cartilage. And that goes back to the analogy that says, that I say, if it weren't for your muscles, your soft tissue, your connective tissue, and the nervous system that controls it, your bones would be in a pile on the floor. So that thinning cartilage didn't happen because it's a cartilage issue or a joint issue. It happened because this master compensatory system kicked in as a protective mechanism. So for me, we will do stem cell or regenerative product therapies in our clinic. But they are all like, I will always recommend it as part of a full plan of everything we just talked about, because it's like, look, a lot of people get these and they'll feel what I call a honeymoon or a transient benefit from it. But if they don't rechange all of the underlying mechanical problems, then eventually they're going to be right back where they were before. And so it's like, look, I'll do this therapy, or we'll do this therapy with you in our clinic, but I'm going to do it in the midst of a full rehab experience that is actually addressing the underlying issues that have come from this.
Yeah, beautifully said. I know from my experience, you got to do both, right? It's kind of like saying, well, we can throw new tires on the car, but we've never adjusted the alignment, and you've actually got a broken axle. But let's throw them on, even though they're really expensive. They're gonna look good, but we're really not fixing anything with it. It really does need a whole body, whole spirit, whole mind approach. Yeah, it's really good to hear. It's always good to hear it framed in the right context or a perspective. You're working in clinical practice, so you've seen these things work and not work. Right. And I just want everybody to hear that at home. Like, I always had a story that there was my lack of healing or progress is because I didn't have enough money for a hyperbaric, or I didn't have enough money for, 10 pass ozone. You name the thing, it changes over time. But it's really the things that I'm willing to do as far as a lifestyle perspective every day. It's the small steps like waking up, and, it could just be, I could say meditate, but for me, it can also be, I have an outdoor shower. It can just be showering outside because I'm looking at the sunlight. I'm in nature. There's no other noise happening. I'm grounding my feet on the concrete, and it's a great moment of serenity. It's very short, but that's most days for me. That's like, unless the shower's broken, that's like how I have my moment in nature every single day. And it's a little one, but man, it is different from plopping on the couch and going through and see who commented on an Instagram story yesterday. It's a very different program running in my mind. It could be when I sit, even when I make a smoothie, not gulping it down, understanding that the blender is a technology that doesn't really honor the process of 30 bites per food, in which my brain is eliciting a cascade of, catecholamines and transmitters to say, hey, Freddie, it's time to digest this shit. Right. Yeah. I'm using a lot of this stuff. You just sit down, and if you just have that power of pause, you're like, and ask yourself, it's like, how do I feel? What do I want? And is this is what I'm taking into my body or what I'm offering my body, is it a convenience to which there's possible like an unrealized cost to?
Yep.
We're doing a podcast. I had an Instagram live. I got a webinar at noon. But the next thing I'm doing is I have to unload the car from the event. So I'm going to throw the weighted vest on. It's only going to take me 20 minutes to put everything away, but I'm going to do it with a 45-pound weighted vest. So I'll get a little cardiovascular pump. So I'm always thinking like, where can I engineer in the things and stop this story that I don't have time to work out today? Because that
Yep.
is such a story. And I don't mean
Yep.
that in a pointed way to people. I mean that like, I promise you there's a way to get it in that isn't extra. It's just different layer you might not have thought about yet.
Totally. Love that. Love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's real. We're like to an hour, right? We like blew through it.
Love it. This has been
I want to ask you just like two follow-up questions. Again, just for fun because you have a lot of cool tech in the office. Tell me something you just love for most people, because I know there are things you're like, oh, that could be good for you, but maybe not you, and you might have a bias on things. But even I'd love to hear your bias in practice. What's like a technology you just love to have, kind of recommend for everybody?
Yeah, I would say so. Probably the first thing, and this is what I teach our clinicians, but also everybody else that I come in contact with. So, I mean, hyperbarics is a huge component of what we do. We have 4 of them in our clinic.
Mm.
And we could save this for another conversation, but the form and style that we use is so safe, so healthy, so like we've got over 20,000 hours without an adverse reaction, that it's like it gives me confidence to say yes to a lot of things, because it's like, look, I don't know, but I understand the mechanisms and this is safe, so let's do it. And so if my wife once asked me, like, other than some of the complete contraindications, like, is there anybody that I would not recommend that for? And really the answer is no. And I mean, and we put everything from my newborn in there to grandma's in there. So I would say that's probably number one. And I would say probably the other thing, like my wife and I talk about this all the time, like if we had if we had all the things at our house, what are the 2 things that we would really want? And the answer is it's hyperbarics and far infrared sauna. But I will tell you, and I'll send you this picture someday, if there's a close third, it probably, and this is not because it's you, right? But if there's a third closest, it's probably the Flow Presso. 1, it feels amazing. 2, if you do it combined with something like Brain Tap, like, oh man, you're giving somebody like the best 40-minute nap that they've ever had in their life. I have a picture of my teenage son on there with the Brain Tap on and just like checked out. And it's like, and that's again where for me it's like, how can I stack into an experience that's sometimes the same time, same day, or in a plan, these types of things to create ultimate. But I would say those 3 things, especially because uh again, like the barrier of who can use those is so low, and the outcomes and all of the above are so potentially high. And that's one of the things I love too, is what's something that can really help most people with the smallest barrier of entry with the highest health outcomes.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. I join with you in all those. Paramount. Breathe, sweat, let go.
Yeah.
Like if you had 3, I mean, it doesn't, again, you can build quite a mansion with those tools directed in the right way and in the right, in the right context. It's such a polarizing world right now. What are we? We're April 14th, we're 2025. Whenever people listen to this, so you can go back and Google if you listen to this 5 years later and look at what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
But if you could have a magic wand and you can tune in everybody's cell phone and you could say something as a message of hope or unity, what would you say to the people of the planet right now?
Oh man, that's like
I know it's a big stage.
the big man. What could I tell the world right now? I think I don't know, and I probably would answer this in different ways when asked at different times. I think probably one of the things that it would be some version of this, because this is stuff that I'm working through with my own life and family life. It's um, if we, regardless of what circumstances we're living in, if we give gratitude first, it will open our eyes to see the unconventional solutions or problem solving that's going on around us and allow us to see our circumstances differently. There's a quote from a leader of my church where he says, joy has very little to do with the circumstances of your life and everything to do with the focus of your life. And so that's where I would say if there's like a message, it's like whatever you're going through, physical, inflammatory, mental, emotional, finding something to be grounded in gratitude will help to shift that focus so that regardless of what you're going through and what you're experiencing, gratitude opens your eyes to see the unconventional solutions that are happening, which can help you overcome and can help drive joy regardless of the circumstances that you're in.
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said. And where can people find you, whether it's the internet or Instagram, or where can people learn more about your clinic and your practice?
Yeah, probably the best place is, our website for our clinic is www.themovement.clinic. That's probably the best place to find me. And that can connect you to me, to us, to our social media, all of those types of things.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, we'll do it again.
Yeah,
Can't
let's
wait
do
for
it.
this to get out. What a great conversation and great way to start my morning.
Yeah,
Appreciate
love
you.
you, buddy. Thank you. Happy Monday.
Yeah, big love.